Hi, I'm Lynn Marion, Director of Marketing at Plant with Purpose. Welcome to Empowered Women Are Leading the Way. Plant with Purpose works around the world with global communities in 8 countries, helping to reverse poverty and deforestation. There's never been a more critical time for this work, and I'm very excited for you to hear from our presenters in this session. However, they've asked me to tee up a video for you before we get started. It's short, but it really helps to set the stage for why our work with women around the world is so important.
Girl child, can you remember who you were before the world told you who you should be?
Deep down, I've always believed in myself and known I'm just as good as anyone else. But lately, I notice that the world treats me differently because I'm a girl. From sunrise to sunset, my sisters and I do chores at home, while my brothers get to do whatever they want. And I see my mother carry the full burden of tending to our family. In church, they don't like when I ask questions, so I've learned to sit quietly. In the street, I see girls who walk in fear, as mothers warn their daughters not to give men the wrong idea. Everywhere I look, the world tells me I'm inferior, but this does not feel true. What's going on here?
Girl child, you are right to question.
Who? Do I know you?
I am your mother's mother and her mother's mother. I am the mother of all.
Then you must know why the world treats us this way. Please tell me, how did this come to be?
Well, it is complicated, and there are many overlapping theories, but we do know that these traditions were man-made long, long ago. It was not always like this. In the beginning, men and women walked side by side together, valued equally as hunters and gatherers. Eventually, we began to settle down, and around this time, we elevated the idea of property and the need to own land and control a workforce. Men became protective of what was theirs, which led to fighting. Sexual violence against women became a weapon of war. Conquerors enslaved women as concubines. Men felt entitled to own and take on many wives, even in times of peace. As their wealth grew, so did the desire to give males an inheritance. Girls came to be seen as property, valued primarily for their sexual purity and ability to have children. They were exchanged between families for a price. Many girls were subjected to traditions aimed at preserving their purity and family honor. Many are still practiced today. It is this domination that gave birth to all forms of slavery and how women became the world's first slaves. It is how patriarchy and the ethic of male honor became the norm. Patriarchy was woven into our civilizations, our laws, economies, philosophies, sciences, and especially our religions. It is everywhere, and it is invisible. It's no accident that we replaced ancient images of God as both male and female with images of God as a man.
But haven't we made progress since those times?
In some ways, yes. But in many ways, we're still moving in the wrong direction.
But what can I do when patriarchy is everywhere? I can't turn my back on my family or my faith.
There is a spiritual path to liberation in the Bible and other religious traditions, but we must be brave and question what isn't working. Women and men, girls and boys, even the earth itself are suffering under the domination of patriarchy. To heal our land, we must bravely untangle our traditions from this oldest oppression. What was made by our hand can also be unmade. We must keep walking the Exodus path from slavery to the freedom of the Promised Land. Imagine if we could re-know the beautiful world that was meant for all God's children.
A world where girls can grow up feeling safe and equally valued?
A world where both boys and girls grow up to be all they were meant to be. Girl child, your curiosity has set you on a path many others have walked before you. Because of their work, we know the way forward, but there's a lot more to do and more truth to discover. Are you ready to take this journey with me?
Wow. That was a powerful video, and I think it sets the stage for what you're going to hear next. So I look forward to introducing you to Christy Renaud and Anna Amani. Here's Empowered Women Are Leading the Way.
Welcome to the session on Empowered Women Leading the Way, which is a topic that we're both qualified and excited to talk about. So
very much so.
Thank you for joining us. I am Christy Renaud. I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Development at Plant with Purpose. I've been working here for about 11 years now. And Anna?
I'm Anna Amani. I started work here in January. I'm the Programs Officer for Africa.
Welcome. We're excited to have you here.
Yes, very excited to be here.
Anna, would you be willing to share a little bit about your story and how you got here, why you're here, why you can talk about women?
Sure. I'm originally from Uganda, East Africa. I lived there until I was 8 years old, and I came as a refugee, an immigrant and a refugee. Uganda was in a civil war at the time, and my family fled from that fighting. I was educated here in Los Angeles, in the Los Angeles area, until my master's degree. I got my master's degree at UCLA in public health, and I went back to the continent, back to Uganda specifically, to do project community development work. It was a child sponsorship program that I was working with. And then I decided that I wanted to get my doctorate in international family and community studies, community development. And so I did that. And then I went back and did even more project work. And that's how I ended up here.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, my story is not anywhere near as adventurous or exciting, nor well-educated as Anna's, but I've been working in international development for a long time now. I studied international development in international business and just had a huge desire to see the world and understand what it's like. So I spent some time living in Africa, probably about 5 or 6 years. I spent a little bit of time living in the Caribbean and Latin America, and a few years living in Asia, South Asia specifically. And along that journey, I've seen a lot of different examples of what it looks like to be a woman around the world. And I think one of the main takeaways that I had from all of those travels is that no community is exactly the same as another. But there is a common thread that goes through a lot of that, which is that women have it hard sometimes, oftentimes, and women also carry the load of the labor around the world. So I started my career working in anti-human trafficking, and that's what led me to spend some time in South Asia. My experience there was really eye-opening, and it's kind of what led me on the rest of the journey, which is that I was working with women who found themselves in some of the worst possible situations. A lot were sold basically as slaves into brothels and just like the most tragic stories you can imagine. And thinking about what led them there is just what I kept thinking about. I kept thinking about how can I help? And so I studied how did they get here, and almost always it was poverty. Poverty was the root cause of a lot of the violence that people found themselves in. But poverty combined with a lot of, just a lack of options. So I was a quite privileged woman living in that same culture, but I was single. I wasn't married. I didn't have my dad with me. I was just by myself. And even with my education and my position as a foreigner and the fact that I had money, I still couldn't rent an apartment. I finally did, but it was really, really hard. And I had a lot of situations where I had to jump through so many barriers to do something as basic as put a roof over my head. And that just made me think about, well, what about the other women? What about the women who don't carry the same privileges that I have available to me, and how much harder is it for them to leave a bad situation or to make their life better if they have to do it by themselves? How would you go about doing that? So that really kind of started my journey, and from there I learned a lot about the role of women and what women's situation looks like in different places around the world. And Anna, you were sharing with me earlier a little bit about your family in Uganda, and that not everybody got to come.
Yes.
And so some of them are still there, and that gives you a really unique perspective. People you love dearly,
Yes.
know intimately well,
Absolutely.
are living a very different life.
Yes.
And even your mom.
Yeah.
Would you talk to us a little bit?
Yes. I was interested in public health work. But the more I started down that field, the more I realized just how much resonated with me in terms of my mother was married at 14 and she had me at 15, and we both almost died because she was, so young,
Thank God.
producing at such a young age. Yes. And then, being a child refugee and the vulnerabilities of that, being sold or human trafficked or assaulted, all of these things just seemed so close to my experience. I mean, I got my doctorate, but I have first cousins who are in the same situation or were in the same situation as my mom, for being married off for a few cows or whatever the bride price is. And so for me, it was like, there but for the grace of God, that would be me. So it was very close to me. And so this is how I ended up, getting more and more knowledge on those topics that specifically impact rural women.
We're so grateful for your help, Anna. One of the things that I think is just helpful for people to know is that you had a more lucrative commercial style career.
Yes.
And you chose to instead spend your life helping.
Yes, I did start off in corporate America, living the American dream, but at some point I felt called and prepared for this work, to do this work. And I had to put my life energy to something that resonated with me, that was more meaningful to me. And I felt, as believers, we seek for purpose. I felt called, and that this was my purpose.
And I mentioned that also because you're just cool, and I wanted to
Right.
share that with the crowd, but also because you're right. I mean, we have a sense of calling and a sense of purpose. We are a Christian organization. We firmly believe that all people were created in the image of God, and that we all have inherent dignity.
Yes.
And that we also are equipped with skills and gifts and talents. And that's one of the things that we get to focus on when we're talking about integrating women into our programs, is making sure that we are honoring all of those things that stem from who we are as children of God.
Yes.
And that they're not overlooked and they're not left out.
Absolutely.
We wanted to tell you a little bit about our own personal journey, because we thought that might help kind of shape this story, but we also want to give you a few more statistics just to base this in a lot of the many things that Anna has studied over her career. So would you lead us with
Sure. Women produce 70% of Africa's food.
That is huge.
Yes.
I just want to sit on that one for a minute. 70% of the food coming out of Africa produced by women.
Yes.
Also, at the same time, women's labor share in African agriculture accounts for 60 to 80% of the work. So women are producing the food, but it's because it's their labor.
Right.
They're spending the time and energy and sweat and digging that hard clay soil sometimes.
Right.
Women also bear the brunt of other domestic duties on top of that.
Yes.
So doing the work in the fields and coming home and feeding the family.
Right. Rural women are less likely than urban women to have formal employment. They're often unable to own the land that they farm, or inherit the land if it's family land. And they bear a disproportionate share of heading single-parent households.
There's a lot in that as well, especially the land thing for rural women.
Right.
They may be vulnerable if their husband or father or whoever leaves. Again, back to the story of what do you do when these bad things happen? Bad stuff happens. What do you do? Women are vulnerable, and that's huge. But the other thing that we see, which is really exciting, is that there is very strong evidence that savings groups, which is a big component of our purpose groups, expand access to financial resources for women, which help to contribute to asset accumulation, increased income generating investments, opportunities. There's a lot of things that have just been proven through a lot of research to work, to have a huge impact on the lives of women.
Yes, so that's one of the progressive aspects of our programs is our continuing focus on monitoring and evaluation and looking at the most evidence-based approach for our model, so that you can be sure that we're really following things that we measure and know work.
Yeah.
Yes.
And make sure that we're looking at what are the possible side effects of any choice that we make.
Absolutely.
Because sometimes you don't know.
Right.
Would you explain a little bit more about how important it is and why it's important in the development process to foster female participation?
Absolutely. In the global picture of development, I think if you look at society's pre-money, pre-cash economy, the contribution that women made was valued. The care work that they do was valued. Whereas when we moved into a cash economy, we find that women's work became less and less valued because they were not paid. So it became more about who's bringing in the money and less about what contribution are they making to the progress and development of our communities. So part of what we do is to restore that balance, to put attention on the care work, to give women agency, to be able to do the care work effectively. You know, things like raising the children, cooking and cleaning, and these farms that they have, and a huge task that falls on women and girls is getting clean water to the household. It takes hours and hours for them to do that.
And heavy.
Yes.
Very heavy.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a lot of manual labor that women do.
Right.
Around the world.
Right. So sometimes you can get lost in the wording around these studies. So it's good for us to think about what gender equity versus gender inclusion tell us about.
Yeah.
That.
Gender equity is an approach that a lot of organizations use, which is where you try to elevate the role of women to that of the role of men so that they're equitable. At Plant with Purpose, we often align more with the gender inclusion style of women's empowerment, which is where you just make sure that you're inviting the women in and you don't worry as much about measuring the gender difference. But what we find is they often lead us to the same place in many ways. One of the things that we've learned along the way is that sometimes when you artificially try to inflate the role of women or raise the role of women up, and you do it as an outside organization coming in trying to make it happen, that you occasionally can be valuing women at the expense of men.
Right.
And that backfires, especially coming from the perspective of all people, men and women alike, are sacred and reflect the image of God and are just people that we need to care for. And so we would never want to be in a situation where we're elevating the role of women at the expense of men. But we want to make sure that just by naturally bringing women in, including women in the story, including women in the solution, giving women opportunities to lead, that what we start to see is women are smart.
Right.
And they start to surprise people, and people start to understand the value of what it is that women do. A great example that we were talking about earlier is our Congo program.
Yeah.
In Congo, we started working there in 2015. Again, all communities where we work have slightly different gender roles. It's just kind of a thing that happens. But in the community that we started working with in Congo, when we got there were women working so hard. The women's role in that community and culture was to do all of the farming of the backyard agriculture, the subsistence farming that feeds the family, to take care of the kids, to go get the water all the way down the mountain sometimes, to take the food to market, to basically do all the work. And the men were supposed to go out and get jobs, bring money home. Maybe if they're lucky, put on a suit and look smart. But it was just a place that had experienced a long conflict and a lot of economic disinvestment, and those jobs weren't there. The jobs that men were supposed to get. They just weren't there. And so what we found when we arrived is people were eating a little more than a meal a day. Most days, just one meal a day. And they weren't thriving. It was a really, really difficult place with high levels of poverty. We also found a lot of men sitting around because they felt like there wasn't much for them to do. Their job just wasn't there, so they sat there. And everybody was discouraged. And again, we think about gender inclusion and we think about drawing women in, but we don't want to do it in an artificial way.
Right.
Our program model is designed to value women and to think about what it is that women do. So we started by talking to churches, and we use a curriculum there that speaks a lot about the theology of work, reading the Bible, understanding what it is that God is saying to us about our role. And part of our role is that He has created the world and called us to make something beautiful out of it. We know that God deeply, deeply cares about how we care for our families. God deeply cares about how we care for the land, how we care for each other, how we care for Him. All of these things are really important. And so as we started to talk about this, men started to say, you know, God probably wants me to get up and care for the land too. Even though that was traditionally the women's work, the men started doing it because they felt called.
Right.
And that was really exciting. The other thing is our purpose groups and savings group methodology that you were mentioning earlier. It does a lot to help equip women in saving a little bit of money and preparing for the future. And we started to see a lot of businesses form, and women were starting those businesses, and then the men watched and thought, ooh, that looks nice.
Right.
Maybe I should try that. Basically, long story short, men started watching what the women were doing and joining them, and realizing that together they were able to accomplish twice as much. And one of the things that I think is really cool about the stories from that community is to watch the men talk about their wives,
Right.
and to talk about the women in their community, and just this sense of awe of, oh man, these are these are some strong women.
Yeah.
And what they're doing is so important, and it's really, really hard work. It shifted the value. Like Anna was talking about, it shifted that value of women's work in that particular community, and elevated the value without artificially inflating women.
Right.
Women started to become seen as valuable. And I think that especially as Christians following God's call, as we just faithfully live out what we're supposed to do and be caretakers of the earth and caring for our neighbors and caring for the more vulnerable people in our community, we start to understand and see them maybe freshly through the eyes that God sees us through.
Right. Absolutely.
And that's just super beautiful. Yeah, Anna, you had a story that you wanted to share from Burundi.
I wanted to share a story about Emmeline. Emmeline is in Mutsinduzi, which is in Burundi, and she was married for 18 years. But then her husband abandoned the family. And Emmeline was left to take care of the family on her own. So she, being a woman, didn't have very many skills that she could get formal employment. And so she was struggling day to day, just being able to feed and have some school fees for her children. And she was just having a very difficult time. And coming into the program, she was describing herself as, I was poor and unsuccessful and bitter. And being able to join the Plant with Purpose program gave her hope, and it gave her community. And one of the things that we see actually is when a woman is in that situation where she's outside of the community structure of like husbands and wives, they can be very isolating in terms of not really having people to collaborate with and to work with and to just socialize with. And so the Plant with Purpose program gave her that community, and also through the savings group gave her an income, which she was able then to invest into some small projects and have money in her home and pay her children's school fees and She was able to have greater productivity on her farm through improved agricultural training through our program. And just overall was a wonderful testimony. And, one of the quotes that we pull from her story is, "My children who barely ate twice a day before now eat 3 times a day, and they're well dressed, well educated, and well regarded in our community." So this is a beautiful example of how a family that was falling deeper and deeper into poverty and becoming more and more marginalized in the community was able to be pulled into the community, and now they're productive members, they're contributing to the community, they're progressing, and they're well regarded in the community. So
she also told us that people have been watching her.
Yes.
The other people in her community are now starting to follow her lead.
Absolutely. Which is part of our overall watershed model, the idea that whether they are in the program or they're not in the program, the success of our programs impacts the entire community and the entire watershed.
Yeah, I'm sure that she's a great model to her community and someone who's just got a really beautiful story. It's fun to see how much pride you can see in her face in those pictures we have of her, and also of her daughters, and to think about how different her daughter's life will be. Yes. Knowing that their mom is able to take care of them.
And being that example of having agency and that a woman can do these things and provide for her family is really a powerful example for her daughters. And some of the things that we see is that, just like in her story, girls who are more likely to drop out of school will remain in school. And these women are able to provide for their families. The people are eating better. They have better structures in their homes. They have diversified income, which helps with resiliency in terms of natural disasters, or, this time of COVID. We saw that our communities that were in the program were doing much better in having diversified forms of income. And so we're able to go through that period and do well and thrive and help other people in their community.
Oh, and be able to bounce back if a personal tragedy happens, like in Emily's story.
Absolutely. And so we know that the model works. We research and improve it every day, and we're very happy and excited about all the progress that the women in our communities are making. We're very grateful for your support.
Yeah. So we've just shared a little bit about how we work with women, why we think it's important to empower women, and how we do it and how we don't do it.
Yes.
All in all, we just firmly believe that women are valuable.
Yes.
We believe that men are valuable. We believe that children are valuable. Yes. But women specifically are often substantially more vulnerable, and just by seeing them, recognizing them, validating the work that they do, and equipping them.
Yes.
Giving them access to the agriculture training.
Yeah.
Don't only teach the men, also teach the women.
Right.
We can really change entire societies, and in a natural and honoring way.
Yes.
If you have any more questions or want to find out more information, we would love to talk to you about this in more depth. We didn't want to overwhelm you with too much today. But Anna and I are here all the time, so we would love to talk with you further. And thank you very much for joining us today in this session, learning about empowered women leading the way.
Thank you.